And so because of that, you punish yourself. You feel like you don't deserve success. You feel like you deserve to suffer because you're bad, because you did not establish your boundary, you did not live up to your values, and therefore you must suffer. In this video, I'm going to give you a detailed guide on boundaries. Boundaries are the restrictions you place on the external world so that you actually get to act out your values. As an example, let's say that one of your friends is smoking, like smoking cigarettes or even weed, doesn't matter. And you're someone who doesn't smoke, who doesn't like smoking, or you're just not into that. Your boundary would be when your friend offers you a cigarette and they're like, hey, no, I don't smoke. And even if they insist, you stick to your boundary because that's who you are, that's your values. It's very important to define your boundaries because if you don't, then the external world will constantly pull you in every direction. And this also works at the level of thoughts. So let's say that you're working and a thought comes in your head and you just feel like, looking at your phone or scrolling through TikTok or whatever it may be. Because you don't have a boundary, because you lack the ability of asserting boundaries, you're just going to do it. You're just not going to be able to focus clearly on a task. And this ties in with my previous video about how lack of focus and depression are related. Because you don't have boundaries, then you're free to be pulled up in every direction by social media, by other people, and you cannot focus on a single goal. When I was in middle school and high school, I was bullied and kids were like, steal my things, they would throw them around, they'd call me names, And I never really stood up for myself during that time. I mean, I did a little bit, but I could have done much more because I didn't have a clear sense of where my boundaries ended. And I was also afraid of establishing them. Maybe your parents controlled a lot of your life and you didn't have a lot of room to impose your boundaries, impose yourself. Another one for me, and you may also relate, has been manifesting in relationships. My first relationship, I would just let my partner go out and meet, friends for coffee, and I would tell her, hey, look, these guys are like into you, and she'd be like, yeah, but they're just friends, and I'd be okay with that. I mean, I wouldn't be okay with that, but I would just not assert myself. I'd be like, okay, maybe it's me who's a bit jealous, maybe it's me who's a bit insecure. When things ended between us, she started dating this other guy. So you can see that if I had asserted my boundaries, what I would have done would be, hey, look, I'm not okay with this, and you're free to go have lunch with them, with your friend, but I cannot be in a relationship like that. Maybe you can compromise, but still, I would have asserted my boundary in a much more defined way. And so the lack of defining your own boundaries has tremendous consequences. Besides, obviously, the negative consequences of the moment, you start to feel like you hate yourself, like you cannot forgive yourself for having let that boundary down. You cannot forgive yourself for allowing other people to just mess with your reality. And because of that, a deep rooted part of you, and this may be you, this may be not, but this is something I felt for a long time, and this is very nuanced. A deep part of you believes that you should suffer. You should suffer because you did not learn your lesson. This is a big deal here. When you don't establish your boundaries properly in the past, and you don't take the lesson, and you just keep doubling down on other people instead of asserting your own boundaries, you will start to feel like you hate yourself because you don't believe that if another situation like that comes up, you will be able to assert yourself and establish your boundary. You don't believe that you actually changed. And so because of that, you punish yourself. You feel like you don't deserve success. You feel like you deserve to suffer because you're bad, because you did not establish your boundary, you did not live up to your values, and therefore you must suffer. How do you start to heal this? How do you start to actually come with a solution where you no longer hate yourself? You learn your lesson. That's the most important thing. You learn your lesson. You start establishing boundaries. You realize what you value and what you don't value. And then you can actually act on what it is what you want to do. You no longer self-sabotage, or maybe not due to that cause. As obvious as it may be, you want to be aware of the part of you that wants you to fail. You want to be aware of the part of you that's angry at you, and specifically the reason why it's angry at you. So I told you, in my case, it had to do with these bullying episodes that I spent in middle school and high school. But in your case, it may be different, as we discussed in the beginning of the video. What you're going to start doing is connecting with that part of you who hates yourself and trying to understand, why is it that you hate yourself? What's the lesson that you didn't learn? Because you don't just hate yourself out of randomness, right? There's something that you don't feel you're equipped to deal with. There's some situations where you don't know how to react to. That's what you have to dive into. That's what you have to learn. I saw this great video where they describe trauma as incomplete learning, and that's a great take on it. What you want to do if you struggle with boundaries, and the reason you hate yourself is because you did not establish boundaries in some previous episode, you want to start by establishing boundaries right now. For example, you want to box in time to tackle scheduled tasks that you know that you have to do, because that's the boundary that you have. You have to start defining boundaries, even with your thoughts. Even when you're working on a task and you feel like checking Instagram, you got to be like, no, we're finishing this task. That's your boundary. That's your values. And that's what you live by. You have to establish boundaries with your relationships and people who you spend your time with, people who maybe sap your energy, people who may be not there for you when you needed them. You'll be like, hey, this is not working out for me. You have to start establishing your boundaries and your foundation, because otherwise you'll keep self-sabotaging because you haven't learned your lesson. Learn your lesson. That's the most important thing here, okay? When you start establishing boundaries, you'll start to feel fear because you'll be afraid of the conflict. And that's actually the reason why you had trouble establishing boundaries in the first place, because you didn't want to create conflicts. But guess what? It's better to have conflicts outside and, having to come to people and be like, hey, look, I'm not okay with this, rather than just having a conflict inside, feeling that rotten feeling within you that you knew that you sold yourself out to the fear, or you sold yourself out to some other person. That will eat you up inside. And that's what you have to learn. That's your internal guidance system telling you, hey, look, we have to do something about this. We need to establish our boundaries outside of us, because otherwise we cannot go where we want to go. Finally, there is a very important caveat when establishing boundaries, because you may be a bit hurt about all the time that you wasted, or all this time that you could have been productive and you could have established the boundary, but you were just being pulled in all directions. Don't establish boundaries out of self-hate. This is a very nuanced point. Your tendency will be to go from a place where maybe you were pulled in all directions, maybe you're just people-pleasing and trying to, make sure that everyone was okay with you, where you're just going to go in the exact opposite way, and you'll be like, no, fuck you, this is where we're going. And the issue with that is that you will do that to yourself as well. You'll have that inner voice, that creative, beautiful inner voice that you have within you, who wants to maybe tackle some creative endeavor, like making a YouTube channel, for example. And you'll start to listen to that and be like, no, fuck you. We're going to make money. We're going to go in this direction. I'm not going to be pulled by you either. That's a fundamental mistake, because what you're going to do there is you're going to make yourself miserable. You're going to lose that beautiful energy, that spark of life, and just myopically focus on money or whatever logical metric that you think should be optimized. You have to give that beautiful, joyful feeling the space for it to blossom as well. You have to establish boundaries to protect that. That's what your boundaries must be, and not to just establish boundaries and then aim for a goal somebody else told you. You have to establish boundaries for yourself. That's a very nuanced point. I've tried establishing boundaries out of everything, but then I just feel empty inside because I established a boundary from myself as well. So this has been a very detailed guide on boundaries, on self-sabotage, on self-hate, and I hope that brought value to you. Comment below if you want me to give you some advice on specific situations, or if you just like the video in general. And if you like this kind of content, subscribe, because I'll be making more in the future. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.